The story of American independence is more than just patriots versus a tyrant king. It's a tale of evolving identity and clashing visions. For over a century, the colonies thrived under salutary neglect, governing themselves with little interference from London. Colonial assemblies grew powerful, managing local affairs and salaries, while royal governors remained weak. This self-rule fostered a sense of autonomy and entitlement to English rights. America's social structure was more fluid than Britain's. Land ownership was widespread, giving more men a political voice. When Britain tried to tighten control after the costly 7 Years' War, colonists saw it as a betrayal of their liberties. The British expected the colonies to help pay for their own defense, shifting from neglect to direct management. Colonists believed they were equal partners in the empire, entitled to self-taxation and representation. Britain, however, viewed the colonies as subordinates existing to serve its interests. This fundamental disagreement set the stage for conflict. The colonists' fight was not just about taxes, it was about preserving their vision of freedom and self-government. The seeds of revolution were sown in decades of self-rule and a growing sense of American identity. When Britain changed the rules, the colonies chose to defend their rights. The break was inevitable once both sides refused to compromise on what it meant to be free. The American Revolution was powered by radical ideas as much as by muskets. John Locke's philosophy of natural rights, life, liberty, and property, inspired colonists to see government as a protector, not a master. If government became tyrannical, Locke argued, the people had the right to change it, a notion echoed in the Declaration of Independence. Republicanism, another key influence, taught that liberty depended on virtuous, independent citizens and warned against corruption and concentrated power. Colonists saw British actions as threats to their economic and political independence. Religious conviction fueled the cause, framing the struggle as a battle between liberty and tyranny, good and evil. The Great Awakening had already encouraged colonists to question authority and think for themselves. Print culture, pamphlets, newspapers, and especially Thomas Paine's, spread these ideas rapidly. Paine's direct language made independence seem urgent and inevitable, convincing many that reconciliation was impossible. High literacy rates meant revolutionary ideas reached taverns, town squares, and homes across the colonies. These principles, natural rights, republicanism, and religious zeal, united Americans in a common cause. The revolution was as much a war of words and beliefs as it was of armies. Ideas forged a new nation before the first shot was fired. The end of the French and Indian War marked a turning point. Britain, deep in debt, demanded the colonies help pay for their own defense. The Stamp Act of 1765 was the first direct tax, sparking outrage and the rallying cry, "No taxation without representation." Colonists argued only their own assemblies could tax them, not a distant parliament. Protests and boycotts, led by groups like the Sons of Liberty, forced Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act, but the conflict only deepened. The Declaratory Act and Townshend Acts followed, imposing new taxes and fueling further resistance. Tensions exploded in Boston, where British troops fired on civilians in the Boston Massacre. The Tea Act of 1773, though lowering tea prices, was seen as a trick to accept Parliament's authority. The Boston Tea Party was a bold act of defiance. Colonists dumped British tea into the harbor. Britain responded with the Intolerable Acts, closing Boston's port and tightening control over Massachusetts. These punitive laws convinced colonists that Britain aimed to destroy their liberties. Each new law and protest pushed both sides closer to open conflict. The trust between colony and crown was shattered. The stage was set for revolution. The path to war was now unavoidable. The Intolerable Acts united the colonies in resistance, transforming discontent into action. The First Continental Congress convened, demanding repeal of the acts and organizing a colony-wide boycott of British goods. Committees of correspondence and safety sprang up, acting as shadow governments and mobilizing communities. Ordinary people, farmers, merchants, artisans, and especially women, became active participants. Women led boycotts, produced homespun cloth, and protested merchants who broke the boycott, stepping into public roles. Local militias, including the famed Minutemen, began drilling and stockpiling arms. The colonies were preparing not just for protest but for war. The revolutionary movement was now a network of organized resistance. When British troops marched on Lexington and Concord, the colonists were ready. The fight for freedom had begun in earnest. On April 19, 1775, the first shots at Lexington and Concord ignited the American War for Independence. Minutemen resisted British troops, and by day's end, the British were besieged in Boston. The Second Continental Congress formed the Continental Army, naming George Washington as commander. Washington's leadership held the army together through early defeats and dire shortages. He avoided large battles, fighting a defensive war to wear down the British. Surprise victories at Trenton and Princeton revived American morale. The turning point came at Saratoga in 1777, where American forces forced a British surrender. This victory convinced France to join the war, providing crucial military and financial support. French aid transformed the conflict into a global war, stretching British resources thin. The Continental Army, with French help, kept the revolutionary cause alive. The war was no longer a colonial rebellion. It was an international struggle. Washington's perseverance and foreign alliances were key to survival. The Americans proved they could stand against the world's mightiest empire. The revolution's outcome was far from certain, but the dream of independence endured. The fight for a new nation pressed on. The revolution was a civil war, dividing families and communities. Loyalists, about a fifth of the population, faced persecution and exile, losing homes and livelihoods. For enslaved African Americans, the rhetoric of liberty inspired hope, but reality was mixed. Thousands fled to the British for promised freedom. Some northern states began gradual emancipation, but slavery deepened in the South. Native Americans, most of whom sided with Britain, lost land and autonomy as the new nation expanded westward. The Treaty of Paris ignored Native interests, transferring their lands without consent. Women, vital to the revolutionary effort, gained new respect as Republican mothers, but saw little change in legal or political rights. The ideals of liberty and equality were not fully realized for all. The revolution's promise was unevenly distributed. Some found new opportunities, others faced loss and betrayal. The struggle for freedom left deep scars and unfinished business. The new nation was born with contradictions that would shape its future. The fight for true equality had only just begun. Winning independence was only the beginning. Building a nation was the real test. The first government, under the Articles of Confederation, was weak and ineffective, unable to solve economic or political crises. Shays' Rebellion exposed the need for a stronger central authority. In 1787, delegates met in Philadelphia and drafted a new constitution, creating a federal system with checks and balances. Power was divided between national and state governments, aiming to prevent tyranny. Founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, captured the revolution's ideals and struggles. The American experiment was unprecedented, a republic built on popular sovereignty and individual rights. The revolution's legacy is found in its ideas, its documents, and its ongoing debates. The nation's founding was messy, incomplete, and deeply ambitious. The struggle to live up to revolutionary ideals continues to shape America. The experiment begun in 1776 is still unfolding today,